The fluorescent lights of Henderson and Associates flickered as Margaret Chen locked the last filing cabinet, her fingers trembling not from the cold but from exhaustion. It was Christmas Eve, nearly 9 p.m., and she was the only one left in the accounting firm, except for Mr. Henderson himself, whose office light still glowed like a stubborn star refusing to dim. She shouldn't have been there. Nobody should work until 9 on Christmas Eve, but the Riverside account wouldn't balance itself, and Margaret needed this job more than she needed sleep, more than she needed pride, more than she needed almost anything except her son. Her son, 7-year-old Danny, was waiting at their new apartment with Mrs. Kowalski from 3B, probably already in his too small pajamas, probably trying to stay awake even though Margaret had promised him Santa knew exactly where to find them this year, even though they'd moved 3 times in the past 8 months. Margaret gathered her worn purse and headed toward the exit, but a small sound stopped her cold. It was so faint she almost missed it, a sniffle, barely audible over the building's heating system. She turned slowly, scanning the dimly lit office space. There, partially hidden behind the reception desk, sat a small figure. Her heart seized. Danny. The boy looked up, his face streaked with tears that caught the light like tiny rivers. He wore his winter coat, the blue one from Goodwill that was already getting tight across the shoulders, and clutched his backpack against his chest like a shield. "Baby, what are you doing here?" Margaret rushed to him, dropping to her knees on the industrial carpet. "Where's Mrs. Kowalski? How did you?" "I took the bus," Danny whispered, his voice small and scared. "I remembered the number. You showed me once in case of emergency." Margaret's throat constricted. "Sweetheart, you can't just. Is everything all right out here?" Both of them startled. Richard Henderson stood in his office doorway, his suit jacket finally removed after what had probably been a 16-hour day, his shirt sleeves rolled up. At 62, he cut an imposing figure, tall, silver-haired, with sharp blue eyes that had evaluated countless balance sheets and, Margaret always suspected, countless people. She'd worked for him for 11 months, ever since she'd moved to Riverside after the divorce, after selling the house to pay David's debts, after realizing her degree in accounting from 15 years ago still meant something. Henderson had hired her when no one else would, when her resume had a 7-year gap labeled, homemaker, and her references were from the PTA instead of previous employers. "Mr. Henderson, I'm so sorry." Margaret stood quickly, placing herself between her boss and her son. "This is my son, Danny. There's been a misunderstanding, and I'll take him home right now. It won't happen again, I promise." But Henderson wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Danny, whose tears had started fresh, running silently down his cheeks in a way that broke Margaret's heart into smaller and smaller pieces. "A misunderstanding?" Henderson's voice was gentler than she'd ever heard it. "On Christmas Eve," Danny hiccuped, a small desperate sound, and suddenly words came tumbling out like he'd been holding them back for hours, maybe weeks, maybe longer. "I just wanted to ask. Can you tell Santa we moved? Mom doesn't know I heard her crying last night, and she doesn't know I found the boxes in her closet, the presents she bought before we had to move again because Mr. Cranston raised the rent. She returned them yesterday. I saw the receipts in the trash." The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret felt her face burning, felt every carefully constructed wall she'd built crumbling. This was it. Henderson would see her for what she really was, a failure, a woman who couldn't even provide a proper Christmas for her child, someone who brought her problems to work, literally. "Danny, stop," she managed, her voice cracking. "Mr. Henderson doesn't need to hear about. She's always so tired," Danny continued, looking directly at Henderson now with the brutal honesty only children possess. "She works all the time and she pretends everything's okay, but I'm not stupid. I'm 7.5. I know we had to move because she couldn't afford the old place. I know she eats the small portions at dinner so I can have more. I know she sold her wedding ring even though it made her sad because I saw her looking at her finger after." Margaret felt tears burning her eyes, threatening to spill over. "Danny, please, but Santa won't know where we are now." Danny's voice rose with panic. "We've moved 3 times, and what if he goes to the old house? What if he thinks I've been bad because we keep moving? I thought maybe you're important, maybe you could tell him. Maybe you have a phone number or something." Henderson moved then, walking slowly across the office. Margaret instinctively pulled Danny closer, but Henderson simply lowered himself into one of the client chairs, bringing himself to Danny's eye level. His knees cracked audibly, and he winced slightly before focusing entirely on the boy. Danny, he said quietly, I think Santa is smarter than you're giving him credit for. Moving doesn't mean you've been bad. Sometimes moving means you're being very, very brave. But Mom won't have money for presents. Danny's lip trembled, and I told her I wanted the science kit, the one that lets you grow crystals and do experiments. I wrote it in my letter to Santa before we moved the last time. But now she can't afford it and it's my fault for asking. It's not your fault, Margaret choked out, finally unable to hold back her tears. She pulled Danny into her arms, breathing in the scent of his strawberry shampoo, feeling his small body shake with sobs. None of this is your fault, baby. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you've had to see. I wanted to protect you from all of this. Mrs. Chen. Henderson's voice cut through her anguish. Margaret, look at me, please. She raised her head slowly, expecting disgust or pity or worse, awkward discomfort. Instead, she found something she couldn't quite identify in his eyes. How long have you been struggling like this? He asked. I'm not struggling, she said automatically, the lie tasting bitter. I mean, we're managing. I just need to. Margaret, he said her first name again, and somehow that broke something loose inside her. Since the divorce was finalized, she whispered. 14 months. My ex-husband, David, had debts I didn't know about. Gambling, mostly. When I found out, when I tried to leave, he cleaned out our savings. The house had to be sold to pay creditors. I moved here because the cost of living was supposed to be lower, and I could start over where nobody knew I'd failed. You didn't fail, Henderson said firmly. But you should have told me what was happening. How could I? Margaret's voice rose slightly. You gave me a chance when no one else would. You trusted me with your clients, with sensitive information. I couldn't let you see that we were barely holding on. I couldn't risk losing this job. It's the only thing standing between us and complete disaster. Danny pulled back from his mother, looking up at her with red-rimmed eyes. I didn't mean to make things harder, Mom. I just really wanted Santa to know where we are. I don't care about the science kit anymore. I just want you to stop crying at night. Margaret couldn't breathe. The weight of her son's words, his awareness of her nighttime breakdowns, crushed her. She'd thought she'd been so careful, waiting until he was asleep, crying silently into her pillow as she ran numbers in her head, trying to figure out how to make $800 stretch to cover rent, utilities, groceries, gas, and Danny's school supplies. Henderson stood abruptly. Wait here, both of you. He disappeared into his office before Margaret could respond. She heard drawers opening, papers rustling, the sound of his printer humming to life. Danny leaned against her, suddenly looking exhausted, and she wrapped her arms around him, wondering what came next. Termination, probably. Henderson would say something kind, give her 2 weeks severance if she was lucky, and she'd be back to square one with a son who'd ridden the bus alone on Christmas Eve because he believed in Santa Claus and mothers who couldn't hold their lives together. When Henderson returned, he carried a folder and an envelope. He sat down across from them again, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Chen, Margaret, I'm going to tell you something I don't share often. He paused, seeming to gather himself. 40 years ago, I was exactly where you are now. Different circumstances, same desperation. My wife had died giving birth to our daughter, and I was a junior accountant trying to raise a newborn alone. I couldn't afford childcare. I couldn't afford funeral expenses. I was drowning. Margaret stared at him. In 11 months, she'd never heard Henderson mention a wife or daughter. She'd assumed he was a lifelong bachelor, married to his work. My boss at the time, Harold Greenspan, found me sleeping in my office one night because I'd been evicted from my apartment. I was using the office bathroom to wash Sarah's bottles, stealing toilet paper to save money. I was certain he'd fire me. Henderson's voice grew thick with memory. Instead, he gave me a loan, interest-free, and helped me find affordable housing. He told me that good people have hard times, and that anyone who'd gone through what I'd gone through and still showed up to work every day with accuracy and dedication was someone worth investing in. Mr. Henderson, Margaret breathed. Sarah is 40 now. She's a doctor in Seattle, married with 3 kids of her own. She exists because Harold Greenspan saw past my circumstances to my character. He opened the folder, revealing what looked like a contract. I've been watching you, Margaret. You're the best accountant I've hired in 20 years. You're meticulous, honest, and you care about accuracy like it's a moral imperative. But more than that, you're raising a son who's brave enough to ride the bus alone on Christmas Eve, not for himself, but because he's worried about his mother. He slid the folder across to her. Effective January 1st, this is your new employment contract. You're being promoted to senior accountant with a 40% salary increase. Additionally, the firm will cover your health insurance completely, and there's a housing assistance program I should have told you about months ago. It's buried in the employee handbook. I'm guessing you never had time to read thoroughly. Margaret's hands shook as she picked up the contract. The numbers swam before her eyes, numbers that would mean groceries without calculating every item, numbers that would mean Danny could have new clothes that fit, numbers that would mean breathing room for the first time in over a year. I don't understand, she whispered. Why, I haven't done anything to deserve. You've done everything right, Henderson interrupted. You've shown up. You've worked harder than anyone else here. You've maintained your integrity under circumstances that would have broken most people. The only thing you did wrong was not asking for help. He turned to Danny. And you, young man, did exactly the right thing coming here tonight, even if it scared your mother half to death. Danny looked between Henderson and his mother, confusion and hope warring on his face. Does this mean Mom doesn't have to cry anymore? I can't promise that, Henderson said honestly. Your mother's been through something very difficult, and healing takes time. But I can promise that things are going to get easier. He held out the envelope. This is 3 months advance on your new salary, Margaret. Consider it a loan if it makes you feel better, though I'll deny we ever had that conversation. Use it to catch up, to get settled, to buy your son his science kit. He looked at Danny. And as for Santa knowing where you are, I think I can help with that too. How? Danny asked, his voice small and wondering. Henderson smiled, and Margaret realized she'd never actually seen her boss smile before. It transformed his entire face, revealing the younger man he'd once been, the desperate father who'd slept in his office with a newborn. Magic, Henderson said simply. The kind that happens when people help each other. The kind your mother has been giving you every single day by working so hard, even when she was exhausted and scared. The kind you gave her tonight by being brave enough to ask for help, even though you didn't know how. Margaret was crying openly now, not bothering to hide it. She pulled Danny close with one arm and held the envelope with the other, feeling its weight, its promise, its mercy. I don't know what to say. Thank you doesn't seem. Then don't say anything yet. Henderson stood, his knees cracking again. Just promise me something. When you're on your feet again, when things are stable and you're not fighting just to survive, and that day will come, I promise you, pay it forward. Watch for someone else who's drowning. Throw them a rope. Margaret nodded, unable to speak. Henderson checked his watch. It's nearly 10. You two should go home. Mrs. Kowalski is probably worried sick. Danny, give your mother the phone. I'm guessing you used to call her from the reception desk. Danny's eyes went wide, and Margaret's head snapped toward the reception area. The phone was indeed off the hook, and she could hear a faint, tinny voice calling her name. 10 minutes later, after profuse apologies to a relieved but understanding Mrs. Kowalski, after promises to explain everything, Margaret and Danny walked out of Henderson and Associates into the cold Christmas Eve night. Light snow had begun to fall, dusting the parking lot with white. Danny held her hand tightly. Mom, is it real? Is everything going to be okay? Margaret looked down at her son, at his upturned face full of hope and lingering worry, at the boy who'd grown up too fast because circumstances had forced him to. She thought about Henderson's story, about how one act of kindness 40 years ago had rippled forward, creating a doctor in Seattle and 3 grandchildren who might never know how close they'd come to not existing. Yes, baby, she said, and meant it. Everything's going to be okay. We're going to be okay. Did Mr. Henderson really tell Santa where we are? Margaret smiled through her tears. I think he did something even better. I think he reminded Santa that we were worth finding. They drove home through the gentle snow, and for the first time in 14 months, Margaret felt the crushing weight on her chest begin to lift. The apartment would still be small when they got there. The furniture would still be secondhand. The tree would still be a 3-foot artificial one from a drugstore clearance sale. But the envelope in her purse held more than money. It held dignity returned, hope restored, and the knowledge that someone had seen her struggle and chose to help rather than judge. It held the promise that tomorrow, Christmas Day, she could wake up and not immediately calculate how many days until the rent was due, how many meals she could stretch from one package of chicken, how long she could make her car last before the transmission finally gave out. That night, After Danny had fallen asleep on the couch waiting for Santa, Margaret sat at their small kitchen table and opened her laptop. She drafted an email to Henderson, trying to express gratitude that felt too large for words. She deleted it 3 times before finally settling on something simple: "Thank you for seeing us. Thank you for helping us. Thank you for teaching me that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Someday, I'll pay it forward. That's a promise." She hit send and then did something she hadn't done in months. She went to her closet and pulled out the boxes she'd tried to return, the ones the store had refused because she'd missed the deadline. Inside were a science kit, some books, and a few small toys, not much, but chosen with love. She'd make it work now. Henderson's envelope meant she could keep them, could give her son a real Christmas morning. As she wrapped the presents in newspaper comics, all she had, Margaret thought about Danny's question at the office: "Can you tell Santa we moved?" Henderson had answered in the most profound way possible. He'd told them that being found had nothing to do with staying in one place. It had everything to do with being worth the search. The snow fell heavier outside, muffling the city sounds, turning the world soft and new. Somewhere, in houses all over town, children slept waiting for morning. But in Margaret Chen's small apartment, a mother who'd forgotten how to hope was remembering, one wrapped present at a time. And in the quiet, in the space between struggle and salvation, Christmas Eve became Christmas morning, bringing with it not just gifts under a small tree, but something far more precious: the belief that tomorrow could be different, that kindness still existed, and that sometimes, just sometimes, Santa really does know exactly where to find you, even when you've moved. Especially then.